After that devastating loss against Bakram Mardazaliev, it seems like Tszyu is back in the winning circle. There was also some interesting information that came out in the post-fight interview that I wasn't aware of that kind of makes sense looking back at the Bakram Mardazaliev fight, and maybe part of the reason why he lost that fight. Only a small part, maybe a medium-sized part. Anyway, let's dive in. People can criticize Tszyu as much as they want. Maybe they want to complain about the opponent. He wasn't skilled enough. He wasn't high level enough. Maybe they think that he wasn't far enough up on the ranks for Tim to be fighting him. Maybe they think that Tim could have fought a tougher opponent. Whatever people want to criticize him for, you've got to give him credit. That was the way to come back. And I can't fault him, because after losing the way that he did at the end of last year, that is the perfect fight to have and the perfect way to win. And the opponent wasn't a deadbeat. He wasn't some mug. He was a decent young fighter, maybe not up there at the level that he was at prior to fighting Bakram Mardazaliev, but still up there in the rankings, and a young, motivated fighter. So in my books, in my eyes, I think Tszyu did a great job, and he's back in the winning circle. And I see him as he is back. And if you're going to come back, that's the way you want to do it, by stopping your opponent. And the way that he stopped him, that hand speed was probably what I was most impressed with. The hand speed and the combinations, he just let loose. Once those combinations started landing, it was combination, and combination, and just the speed of his hands, I was impressed. Watching the replay back, I was like, wow, I don't think I've seen his hands move that fast before. And the accuracy of his combinations, and just how many shots were actually on target, just gave Spencer's corner no choice but to throw in the towel. And give it a bit more time, the ref would have most likely stopped it anyway. So obviously, Tim and his team and No Limit are happy that he's back in the winning circle, and potentially back up there of possibly fighting for a world title in the next maybe 2 fights or so. Who knows, maybe the next fight. There was an interesting thing I did hear come out of the post-fight interview, and that was the fact that there was a rehydration clause in the Bakram Mardazaliev fight. And Tim mentioned how much that took out of him. And what surprised me is the fact that that was the first time that most people had heard that. That was the first time most people had heard that after this fight, after his comeback fight, where I think a lot of other fighters would have used that instantly as an excuse. So I was pretty surprised and actually pretty impressed the fact that that information wasn't something that came out immediately after him losing. So you got to give him credit, not making excuses, taking the loss for a loss, and then not mentioning one of the contributing factors of that loss, potentially, until after his next fight, his comeback fight. So that to me earned my respect. Anyway, moving on from this fight, who's next? We've got Keith Thurman, we've got the Towering Inferno, Sebastian Fundora, we've got Spencer, we've got Virgil Ortiz Jr., we've got Bakram Mardazaliev rematch. So there's lots of fights that can potentially happen, but probably 1 or 2 fights that will most likely happen next. And of course, the one they've been calling out is the Keith Thurman fight. To me, yeah, that's, I guess, a decent fight. Get in there with Keith Thurman, the older, very classy fighter. I think it will be a challenge for Tim if he does get in there with him. However, I think the better option would be Sebastian Fundora. If you're going to take a risk, why not take it against the guy who holds 2 titles? And I think Keith Thurman is kind of a risky fight because of his level, and although he's probably not at the same level that he used to be when he was active, it's still a dangerous fight. So it's risk without reward. However, the Sebastian Fundora fight, I think, is less risky and more rewards, because we already seen how the first fight initially went, and that was Tim dominating until he got a cut, and then sort of overcoming that cut to an extent to make it a split decision in that fight, but just couldn't do enough to actually come away with the win. So to me, if you're looking at those 2 fights, which I think they are the most likely fights to happen next, I think I would prefer to take the Sebastian Fundora fight over the Keith Thurman fight. But either way, I think it's a good path. Keith Thurman fight will be a good and entertaining fight in Australia. So for me, I think I would probably prefer that because it will be here in Australia and potentially in Sydney. Probably not, probably be in the Gold Coast. But anyway, in Australia nonetheless. And then if he does surpass Keith Thurman, ultimately he'll most likely go into Sebastian Fundora. Spencer, I wouldn't see a reason why you'd want to get in there with Spencer. He's been inactive for a while and it's the same thing. A probably higher risk maybe than Sebastian Fundora and no reward. Virgil Ortiz, I think that would be a good fight, a good classic battle. But again, I would prefer Tim to get in there with Sebastian Fundora and potentially grab them 2 belts prior to fighting a risky fighter like Virgil Ortiz. And if we look at the rematch with Bakram Murtazaliev, I'd probably give Tim a little bit more confidence and wait until he wins a couple more fights before getting back in there with Bakram Murtazaliev. Although I think he knows what he did wrong and there were flaws in his game as well as the rehydration clause, which we have found out about now, I still think that's a risky, tough fight. And I don't know if it won't go the same way, but maybe it won't. Who knows? I guess we'll have to wait and see if it does happen. Anyway, also in the post-fight interview, Tszyu did also mention that he's not going to stay in the division that he's in for much longer. So he could potentially be moving up to middleweight in the next 12 months or so. Which for me, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's actually probably a good thing for him and his team, especially if he gains a belt or 2 prior to going up to middleweight. Because I think that weight class is less risky. The super welterweight division is a stacked division at the moment. So I think if you can grab a belt or 2 if you're Tszyu and achieve being a 2-time world champion and then move on up away from all them risky fighters, especially if you're already struggling with the weight. So let your natural body just move up to the middleweight and then take on new challenges in that division. And less risky fighters or less high level fighters. Still high level fighters in that weight division, but nowhere near as many. But anyway, that's just my thoughts. I thought it was a very good performance from Tszyu and I think he's back. So I'm happy about that, especially being an Aussie. So what are your thoughts? Do you think Tim's back? Do you think he's back at that world-class level and will potentially get a world title? Were you disappointed with his performance? Do you think his opponent wasn't skilled enough and he should have fought someone better? Who do you think he should fight next? So many questions. Anyway, let me know in the comments below. Until next time, peace out.
Myths in boxing, highlight reels mean, front row seats to the blow by blow scene.